Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking the epic 30-year journey of PlayStation. We're going to tell the whole story of the company from beginning to end, literally tracing its accidental birth as a scorned side project all the way to its absolute, undisputed dominance of the video game industry.
Okay, let's kick things off with a pretty wild thought. What if the multi-billion-dollar PlayStation empire we all know today only exists because of a botched contract? It's true. Up until the early 1990s, Sony actually had very little direct involvement in the video game space. At the time, they were mostly just supplying components for Nintendo. But behind the scenes, they had been working closely together on a CD-ROM add-on for the Super Nintendo.
Because, wow, did that partnership fall apart spectacularly. Nintendo famously blindsided Sony at the 1991 Consumer Electronics Show by publicly announcing a partnership with Philips instead. And they did this just a day after Sony had unveiled their joint project. As the journalist David Sheff so perfectly captured in his book Game Over, the Philips deal was meant to do two things at once: give Nintendo back its stranglehold on software and gracefully screw Sony. It was a brutal move over licensing control, and it sparked a legendary corporate revenge story. Sony's president at the time, Norio Ogo, was absolutely infuriated.
So here is our roadmap for today's explainer. Number 1, a betrayal births an empire. Number 2, decades of console dominance. 3, forging a digital ecosystem. 4, the live service pivot. 5, returning to core strengths. And finally, number 6, the future of PlayStation.
Let's dive right in. Section 1. A betrayal births an empire. From partners to fierce rivals.
It's amazing how fast things moved after that betrayal. In just a handful of years, Ken Kutaragi, the guy often called the father of the PlayStation, took Sony from being a spurned components manufacturer to launching an entirely revolutionary console. What's super fascinating here is that to bypass older, skeptical executives who honestly thought video games were completely beneath their premium electronics brand, Kutaragi and his team were secretly incubated over at Sony Music Entertainment Japan. That setup gave them the disc manufacturing capabilities they desperately needed, eventually leading to the formation of Sony Computer Entertainment in 1993 and the monumental launch of the original PlayStation in 1994.
Which brings us to Section 2, Decades of Console Dominance, Winning the Living Room.
When you look at the sheer staggering volume of hardware shipped generation after generation, it's honestly mind-blowing. The original PlayStation became the first video game console ever to break that 100 million unit mark. And even today, despite massive shifts in the global market, the PlayStation 5 is maintaining incredible momentum. It's already shipped well over 93 million units and is still going strong, totally continuing that legacy.
But the absolute crucial point here is the unprecedented success of the PlayStation 2. Released back in 2000, it is still the best-selling home console of all time, with a massive 160 million units shipped. 160 million. And here's the secret sauce. It wasn't just a gaming machine. It was a Trojan horse for DVD playback, pulling non-gamers into the PlayStation ecosystem by the million. Of course, hardware alone doesn't win wars, right? Software does. And Sony rapidly won over massive third-party developers like EA and Namco. Why? Simply because manufacturing their CD-ROMs was vastly cheaper, easier, and way less restrictive than Nintendo's highly controlled cartridge system. Plus, Sony built the hardware from the ground up for real-time 3D polygon graphics, which was a huge, game-changing leap over the 2D sprites everyone was used to.
But selling physical hardware boxes just wasn't going to be enough for the modern era. Let's look at Section 3, Forging a Digital Ecosystem. Unifying hardware and services.
By 2016, we hit a major structural watershed moment. Sony clearly saw the massive shift toward digital storefronts and network economies, so they decided to merge Sony Computer Entertainment, their traditional Tokyo-based hardware and games wing, with Sony Network Entertainment International, their US-based network wing. This huge move created the unified Sony Interactive Entertainment, or SIE, and they officially relocated their global headquarters to San Mateo, California.
You can really see how this evolved over time. The PlayStation Network transitioned from a simple, free matchmaking service back on the PS3 into a highly financialized subscription model. By June 2022, facing some incredibly intense pressure from Microsoft's Xbox Game Pass, Sony executed a major structural overhaul. They retired their standalone cloud service, PS Now, and folded everything into a modernized, three-tier PlayStation Plus ecosystem entirely designed to maximize recurring revenue.
And seeing the massive recurring revenue generated by multiplayer juggernauts like Fortnite, Sony decided to make a really aggressive move. Section 4. The live service pivot. Chasing the recurring revenue dream.
To fast-track this shift, Sony dropped a jaw-dropping $3.7 billion to acquire Bungie in 2022. That's billion with a B. The whole intention there was to immediately leverage Bungie's deep, industry-leading expertise in multiplayer development to rapidly build out PlayStation's own live service ambitions.
Their ambition here was staggering. They publicly committed to launching 12 live service AAA titles by March 2026, pivoting hard away from their bread and butter, one-and-done single-player retail games. But reality hit them pretty hard. By late 2023, that 12-game plan was drastically cut in half. Projects completely stalled, and games like Concord suffered disastrous releases. We're talking reported losses of over $200 million and the heartbreaking closure of Firewalk Studios. Following those incredibly painful and frankly costly live service stumbles, PlayStation leadership officially recalibrated. Section 5. Returning to core strengths. The bifurcated portfolio strategy.
Under CEO Herman Holst, Sony implemented a highly calculated bifurcated strategy. Basically, it works like this. Live service multiplayer games will launch simultaneously on PS5 and PC because that maximizes the network scale and those all-important player pools. However, prestige, single-player narrative titles, think massive system sellers like the upcoming Ghost of Yoti or Marvel's Wolverine, will remain strictly exclusive to PlayStation consoles for significantly longer windows.
And the massive driving force behind this exclusivity, it's customer lifetime value, or LTV. The long-term revenue of trapping you in the PS Plus ecosystem, where you're buying hardware, paying for subscriptions, and grabbing digital games directly from Sony, far outpaces a one-off digital sale on a third-party store like PC Steam, where Sony loses a standard 30% revenue cut. Sony even went as far as expunging commitments to deploy first-party titles on PC from their SEC reports, which is a massive signal of a hard return to a console-first ecosystem.
So, with the strategic foundation officially reset, exactly where is the platform heading next? Section 6, the future of PlayStation, beyond the living room.
Well, defying a lot of initial industry skepticism, the PlayStation Portal Remote Player actually became a massive financial success, literally becoming the #1 accessory in dollar sales for the US market in 2024. Just look at how the attach rate steadily climbs, reaching 7% of all US PS5 owners by December 2025. And crucially, a firmware update later allowed it to stream games directly from Sony's servers via the cloud, completely bypassing the local PS5 entirely. That's huge!
This hardware success directly informs the heavily rumored PlayStation 6, which we're anticipating somewhere between 2028 and 2029. Sony execs are internally calling this a Beyond the Living Room initiative. By heavily integrating server-side cloud streaming and drawing right on the success of the PS Portal, the next generation aims to decouple the high-end gaming experience from your traditional living room television setup. It's a highly optimized architectural path straight to an all-digital future.
Through all these structural shifts, Sony is aiming for absolute control over the platform value chain. They want to transform PlayStation from a traditional plastic console brand into a unified, borderless, all-digital ecosystem. So, the ultimate question is, as PlayStation boldly enters its 4th decade, are you ready to leave physical discs and traditional TVs behind? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope you've enjoyed tracing the entire incredible journey of PlayStation.